Most double albums in the past have been generally bad because people can't seem to write enough good material for a double album.
Because I'm really pleased with it as something that was done like 7 years ago. It's a really good album, but as long as people are aware that it was made 7 years ago.
Robert Smith never set out to be anyone's idea of a rock star. For more than 4 decades, he's been an enigma, a figure both haunting and human. Too gloomy for pop radio, too heartfelt for punk rebellion, too unconventional for mainstream fame. He existed in the strange space between genres, where sadness could sound like beauty and heartbreak could feel like poetry. With his wild, uncombed hair and smeared lipstick, he became the face of romantic despair. Not because he tried to, but because he couldn't be anything else. The Cure wasn't born from a desire to fit in. It was born from the feeling of not belonging anywhere. And in that alienation, Robert Smith found his identity. For years, Smith was reluctant to talk about influences. He didn't like the idea of defining his sound by other people's art. But as he grew older, something softened. Maybe it was the nostalgia that comes with age, or the recognition that the music that once shaped him still hums in the background of his life. At 66, Smith finally opened up, naming the 10 rock albums that shaped not just his taste, but his soul. These records weren't picked for fame or technical brilliance. They were chosen because they made him feel understood. They carried the kind of emotional truth that can't be taught, only felt, before the world knew him as the dark poet of post-punk. Robert was just a kid in Crawley, England, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor surrounded by records. He wasn't drawn to happy songs. He was drawn to the ones that admitted pain existed, the ones that didn't run from melancholy but embraced it. Through those records, he learned that vulnerability could be powerful, that gentleness didn't mean weakness, that even loneliness could sound beautiful if you found the right melody for it. These albums didn't just inspire him, they gave him permission. Permission to feel deeply, permission to sound different, permission to turn emotion into art. When asked why these albums mattered so much, Smith once said, "They reminded me that being sad doesn't mean being broken. It means you care." That philosophy became the heartbeat of The Cure's music, songs that lived in the gray area between joy and despair, hope and heartbreak. For Smith, great music didn't just entertain. It revealed something true about the human experience. These 10 records taught him that honesty, no matter how dark, was the purest form of connection. The first album on Smith's list is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie. Released in 1972, it was a revelation to teenage Robert. Bowie didn't just sing, he transformed. Every song felt like a transmission from another dimension. Starman sounded like it had fallen from the sky, while 5 Years opened with the end of the world and somehow made it sound beautiful. Bowie wasn't afraid to be theatrical, to blur the lines between fantasy and confession. For Smith, this album was a doorway, proof that you could build your own universe through music, that you didn't have to play by anyone's rules. Bowie made it okay to be strange, to wear your emotions and your makeup proudly. To Smith, Ziggy Stardust wasn't just an album, it was permission to exist outside expectations. Next came Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix. Released 4 years before Smith's first band ever rehearsed, it showed him that emotion could live inside sound. Hendrix didn't just play guitar, he spoke through it. Songs like Voodoo Child and Burning of the Midnight Lamp carried raw emotion in every note. It wasn't just about technique, it was about atmosphere. Hendrix painted with distortion, using feedback as color, bending notes until they cried or screamed. For Smith, it was a revelation that a song could feel like a place, an entire emotional landscape built from sound alone. When The Cure later drenched their guitars in chorus and delay, creating that swirling, dreamlike haze, it was Hendrix's influence echoing through time. Electric Ladyland taught him that music didn't need to make sense to make you feel something. The third record Smith named was Transformer by Lou Reed. Released in 1972, produced by Bowie, it was an album that lived in the shadows, filled with characters who didn't fit into polite society. Walk on the Wild Side wasn't just a song, it was a celebration of outsiders. Lou Reed's voice was half bored, half heartbroken, but always brutally honest. For Smith, that honesty was everything. Transformer showed him that you could tell dark stories without hiding behind metaphor, that you could sing about pain, confusion, and identity without apology. It was Reed's emotional detachment, that calm amid chaos, that fascinated Smith. Where most singers reached for emotion, Reed stayed still, and that stillness made it hit even harder. It taught Robert that silence and simplicity could be just as powerful as noise. Fourth on Smith's list was Horses by Patti Smith. When Robert first heard Patti's voice, it wasn't just music, it was a spiritual awakening. "Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine," she howled at the start of the record, and from that moment he was hooked. It was rebellion wrapped in poetry. Patti Smith proved that rock could be intellectual without losing its fire. Her words cut deep, her delivery wild and unfiltered. For Robert, she wasn't just a singer, she was a prophet of self-expression. Horses gave him courage to write lyrics that felt like diary entries and to perform them without fear of vulnerability. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. He often said that Patti Smith made him believe art could come from anywhere. Even from the parts of yourself you're afraid to. Show, the fifth album on his list, is one that surprised many, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. It's easy to forget how revolutionary. It was when it came out in 1973, the seamless transitions, the philosophical lyrics, the way it captured the feeling of time slipping through your fingers. For Smith, this wasn't background music. It was an existential journey. He would listen alone at night, headphones on, eyes closed, letting it wash over him. Time and us and them felt like confessions whispered by the universe itself. Pink Floyd showed him that melancholy could be epic, that sadness didn't have to be small. It could be vast and cosmic. That emotional grandeur inspired The Cure's later masterpieces like Disintegration, where every note feels like a sigh echoing through space. By the time Robert Smith turned 20, these albums had already built the emotional foundation of who he was. He didn't imitate them, he absorbed them. Each one gave him a new understanding of what music could do. From Bowie, he learned transformation. From Hendrix, freedom. From Lou Reed, honesty. From Patti Smith, courage. From Pink Floyd, atmosphere. Together, they became the DNA of The Cure's sound, melodic yet mournful, beautiful yet broken. But there were still more records to come, albums that would push him deeper into the emotional labyrinth that defined his songwriting. As Smith grew older, fame arrived, but so did introspection. And the records he held closest weren't the ones about success. They were the ones about surviving it. The sixth album Robert Smith chose was Low by David Bowie. By the time Low arrived in 1977, Bowie had shed his glam persona and was exploring something far more introspective. For Robert, this record felt like standing in a quiet room full of ghosts. There were stretches of near silence, sudden electronic bursts, and songs that sounded like fragments of thoughts rather than polished pop. Warszawa, in particular, struck him, a wordless cry that felt both ancient and futuristic. Smith saw in Low the beauty of emotional minimalism, the courage to say less and mean more. He learned that darkness didn't need to be dramatic. It could be subtle, distant, and strangely comforting. That influence can be felt in The Cure's more atmospheric works, where voice and sound merge into pure emotion, where space and silence become instruments of their own. Next on his list was Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. When Robert first heard Ian Curtis sing, he said it felt like listening to someone sinking in slow motion. Released in 1979, the album captured the post-punk moment at its most fragile, icy, haunted, and unbearably human. Songs like Disorder and Shadow Play resonated with Smith's sense of emotional isolation. But what impressed him most was the production. That cavernous sound, the feeling that the music was echoing inside your head. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't even clean, but it was honest. It was the sound of real despair, unfiltered and alive. Smith once admitted that Joy Division made him realize he could stop pretending, that he could make music that sounded exactly like what he felt, no matter how uncomfortable it was. Unknown pleasures taught him that darkness could be pure, not performative. The eighth album on his list was The Velvet Underground and Nico. Released in 1967, long before punk or goth had names, it felt like a secret map to another world. The songs were raw, unsettling, and strangely tender. Sunday morning shimmered with deceptive calm, while heroin exploded into chaos and beauty all at once. Robert Smith loved that duality, how the Velvet Underground could be both ugly and exquisite in the same breath. Lou Reed and John Cale didn't hide the messiness of emotion. They invited it in. For Smith, it was liberation. It told him that art doesn't need to comfort you. It needs to tell the truth. And that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, could still sound beautiful. The Cure's early songs, with their minimal chords and intimate vulnerability, were born from that same spirit. The ninth album Robert named was Berlin by Lou Reed. If Transformer celebrated the wild, glamorous side of life, Berlin confronted the aftermath, the broken pieces left behind. The album's bleakness fascinated Smith. It wasn't misery for shock value. It was honesty stripped bare. Songs like The Kids and The Bed painted a picture of emotional desolation so vivid it almost hurt to listen. But for Smith, that pain was the point. He often said that real art doesn't turn away from suffering. It looks straight at it and finds beauty in the wreckage. Berlin reminded him that sadness could be cinematic, that heartbreak could be told with grandeur and empathy. In many ways, it foreshadowed The Cure's Disintegration, an album born from the same belief that despair can sound magnificent. Finally, the 10th album Robert Smith chose was 17 Seconds by The Cure. His own record, but not out of ego. He included it because it was the moment he truly became himself. Released in 1980, it was quiet, cold, and drenched in atmosphere. Songs like A Forest and M felt suspended between dream and nightmare. It wasn't about radio hits or fame. It was about creating an emotional world. Looking back, Smith realized that 17 Seconds was his response to everything he'd ever loved. Bowie's theatricality, Reed's honesty, Patti Smith's freedom, Joy Division's starkness. It was the sound of him finally understanding that he didn't have to choose between them. He could be all of it at once. 17 Seconds wasn't just an album. It was the moment Robert Smith became Robert Smith. When he reflects on these 10 albums now, Smith doesn't talk about technical brilliance or commercial success. He talks about how they feel. He says they're records that make sadness sound like truth. Each one, in its own way, gave him something he couldn't find anywhere else: courage, vulnerability, freedom, defiance. They taught him that you don't have to hide from your emotions, that even melancholy can be a source of strength. He's often said, half-jokingly, that he writes sad songs because someone has to. But behind that humor is a quiet truth. He makes music for people who feel too much and don't know what to do with it. At 66, Smith has long outlived the teenage angst that started The Cure. But his heart remains the same. He still believes in the power of sadness, still believes that the most beautiful songs are the ones that hurt a little. These 10 albums, from Bowie's Alien Glam to Joy Division's Haunted Echo, aren't just records in his collection. They're reflections of his soul. They're the soundtrack to a life spent chasing honesty over approval, feeling over perfection. When you listen to Robert Smith talk about music, it's not with nostalgia but with gratitude. He doesn't sound like a man looking back at the past. He sounds like someone still in awe of the power of a good song. He knows that without these albums, there would be no Cure, no gothic anthems for the broken-hearted, no poetic laments that turned loneliness into connection. They were his teachers, his companions, his proof that being different wasn't just okay, it was necessary. Robert Smith has spent his life proving that sadness can shimmer, that vulnerability can roar, and that beauty often hides in the dark. These 10 albums shaped that belief. They showed him, and through him, millions of fans, that music isn't about pretending to be okay. It's about finding meaning in not being okay. Bowie once sang, "We can be heroes just for one day." For Robert Smith, the heroes were always the ones who dared to feel too much and had the courage to turn that feeling into song.